Well, good morning, I'm Tom from Avid, and you join me in session at the beautiful 𝘃𝗄𝗄 fisheries in the Midlands. Now, I got here early yesterday for the draw, a day early before Luke the cameraman arrived, and I got a little bit lucky first thing this morning. While Luke was on his way from Brighton, I had a take and I managed to land one of the monster mirrors that live in the bridge pool. Weighed £40 2 ounces. I'm going to drop a little clip in here just so you can have a little look. But what a start to this little trip on the bridge pool. One of the real big ones of the bridge pool. Fish known as the Survivor. Over £40. That will do nicely. Got the fish at first light, so I didn't want to keep it for too long. So before Luke's got here, I've got around, done a quick bit of video on my camera, a couple of quick self takes, and we'll get her back on her way. So during the course of this little video, I'm going to take you through a little look on how I approach a new venue in the autumn. The days are changing, they're getting much cooler, the days are getting shorter, and the fish's habits are changing an awful lot. So there's a number of different things that you can put into your approach that hopefully pay dividends when you're out on the bank this autumn. So first things first, in the autumn, the most important thing for me is finding a spot in the pond. Now, in the summertime, you'll often be fine catching fish on the top of plateaus, on that really hard ground, maybe sandy or gravelly ground. But in the autumn, I much prefer finding those softer, silty spots. That's where the natural food is, and the fish know with those cooler days, the colder nights and the longer nights, that natural food's soon going to be dwindling. So you want to explore your swim thoroughly and find those nice glassy areas of silt, a little bit deeper. In this instance, I'm using a little 3 ounce lead. I don't want too big of a lead, it's not overly deep out there. So I just want to be able to count the lead down as it falls through the water, try and find those slightly deeper bits. Goes without saying, when I'm markering up and leading about, I've got some braid on there. That's the extremity braid with the shock leader, little 3 ounce pear lead, as I say. I'll just flick that around the swim. I don't want to thrash it to a foam, but I want to locate those nice little glassy, silty gullies in a little bit deeper water, where I'm going to hopefully introduce a little bit of bait and get those fish feeding. So when it comes to baiting in the autumn, I'm very conscious on a lot of busy lakes. I've seen loads of bright baits, loads of big particle mixes, loads of boilies and pellets, and I just like to refine it a little bit, incorporate some naturals while still keeping some food value with some boilie crumb. So first and foremost, got some boilie crumb there. Now, I've not chopped that up really thin. That's quite coarse with a few little bits and pieces in. I still want some slightly larger food items down there to get those fish staying on the spot and competing for those bigger bits. So a couple handfuls of that. Now, it's worth noting with this mix, I only mix up enough that I need to bait up. Obviously, it's got naturals and bits and pieces in, and I'm conscious they deteriorate if I leave them, so I knock them batches up as I need them. So all the bait's separate, and I have one mixing bucket. So a couple handfuls of crumb in there, as I say. I'm not going mad. In the autumn, it's really not about quantity. Those days of those big autumn feed-ups, I think, are way beyond us now. The fish see loads of bait all year round, and if I'm honest, autumn, I think, can be some of the trickiest conditions to catch the fish. They're full, the water's getting cooler, they're almost quietening down into the winter slumber. So little is most definitely more in this case. So a couple handfuls of crumb, a big handful of maggots. I like red maggots. As I've said, the fish love harvesting the naturals this time of year. They know they're dying out, and those red maggots, if you ask me, mimic bloodworm about as close as you can get. So a little bit of movement on the spot and that little bit of a visual aspect from those red maggots is great. I much prefer reds to whites, if I'm honest. I think whites are a little bit too blatant, but that's just my personal preference. So equal measures of maggots and boilie crumb. And next up is casters. Now, I absolutely love these. They've got a real crunch to them, just like those natural foods that they'll be eating out in the lake. Again, a little bit of visual there, but nothing too bright. And as I say, they've got fantastic pulling power. There's loads of little food items there. They're going to keep them busy, but ultimately not fill them up. So again, equal measures of casters into the bucket. Give that a little mix. And last up are some liquids. Now, this time of year, as I've said, they've been battered all summer long. They've seen loads of really strong, potent flavours and what have you. And I like to keep it to nice, natural flavours. So, got some liver extract in there. Now, this is a real favourite of mine. It complements the maggots and the naturals brilliantly. So, a little slug of that. That's lovely and thick. That's going to stick to all that crumb and those casters and get down onto the lake bed. So, a little bit of liver extract. And last up, I like to add some Calanus liquid. Now, again, this is a real nice, natural flavour. Well, it actually hasn't got any flavour, it's just the Calanus itself. And that complements those naturals perfectly. So again, nice little slug of that. That's a little bit thinner than the liver extract, so that will draw into your boilie crumb. Give that a little mix up. What you're left with is a really sticky, smelly, tacky mix, which gets to the bottom. It penetrates that silt brilliantly and gets those fish rooting around, looking for every last morsel. So when it comes to rigs in the autumn, I like to stick to my tried and tested rigs. Starting at the rig end itself, I've got a D rig there with a chod hook. Real favourite of mine. That fluorocarbon hook link's fantastic. It's got great reset properties. It's invisible on the lake bed. A lot of the time, this time of year, the water's getting clearer, so I'm conscious that I want my hook link to be as invisible as possible. Got a little sinker in the middle. A lot of the time when they're feeding on those natural baits and that bits of crumb, they're often wafting the rig about, and I just want that to lay out nice and flat on the lake bed every single time. Got a size 4 chod hook there, again, a real favourite of mine, super sharp. And as I say, if a fish sucks that in, he's not getting away with it. Got a 12-turn knotless knot on there. A nice size D on the back for a little bit of movement, and a micro rig swivel. Nice and simple, but super reliable. Hook bait wise, I want to mimic what I've got in my mix. As I say, all summer and spring long, they'll have been battered on bright ones, little pop-ups and things like that. I want this to sit nice and discreet on the lake bed. So I've got a 15mm bug wafter. I've nibbled that down so it looks like a bit of a boilie crumb. I've got 6 maggots on the top. Again, that little bit of movement and those naturals on the top. The fish really do home in on this. I don't want to go too crazy with a great big bunch of maggots, as I say. I want it to be nice and discreet. If guys on the lake are using maggots, I want to make sure that my hook bait isn't leading to any suspicion. That's all nicely balanced, so it'll settle away from the lead every single time. The hook link will be straight and the fish won't need to move far before the hook pricks in their bottom lip. Moving on to the actual lead arrangement, I've got a helicopter on. It's a real favourite of mine anyway, particularly in the autumn when you're fishing those softer areas. It just ensures maximum presentation. It's not going to compromise the rig, it's not going to stick up at a funny angle, and it's going to lie nice and flat on the lake bed every single time. Got about 3.5 inches of travel there. Again, as I said, it's soft out there, so that'll just allow the hook link to ride up in the air and settle nicely. Got a little chod buffer there and a quick change sort of arrangement. So that means I've got a nice hinge point, so if the lead does plug in, it's not going to sit up at a funny angle. It all sits nice and flush on the lake bed. Got a 3-ounce lead on there. I'm not fishing far in this instance, so I don't need the big lead to get out there. I don't want it to plug in too much. That said, I still want a bit of weight there to set that hook home when a fish does pick up the rig. That's all set up on a pin down leader of about 90 centimetres. I'm very conscious this time of year, a lot of the activity and the bites you'll get are in the dark, much different to the summer where you'll get bites in the daytime. In the autumn, I find a lot of the time you get your bites in the dark, so I'm not worried about that standing out even in this clear water. But I know with it being extra heavy, it's going to lie nice and flat, and those feeding fish aren't going to spook off it when they're in the swim. So it's to lead to no suspicion and hopefully convert some more bites. So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the time in the autumn, the darkness is the best chance of a bite. Today we've been sat off the back of the wind, it's been quite pleasant in the sun. Actually quite mild for October, so I have played around with a couple of zigs on my rods, but it's getting to that time now. I want to get the rods out and get some bait out there, so I'm going to wind these zigs in. Hopefully those tricks we've been through so far will stand you in some good stead to catch a few more autumn carp. So with that, I'm going to get these zigs in, get some little bunches of maggots on some wafters, a little bit of bait out there, and hopefully we'll have a carp this evening or in the morning to show you. So my last piece of advice for today, just before it gets dark, and arguably most important, is all about being comfort. Now, might sound like a bit of a strange one, but can be lured into a false sense of security. All summer long, it's been lovely and warm. Even this summer particularly, we've had a super mild summer. So you can get away with having open fronted brollies, stripping your bed chair right down, and you're not going to feel the cold. But now it's autumn, those nights are drawing in, spending an awful lot more time in your shelter, most importantly in your bed. So a few creature comforts really don't go amiss at this time of year, as I say, because the last thing you want to do is get caught short without and sit there shivering all night and not fishing at your best. So I'm under the brolly, I've got the front on, and I've actually got the dual layer in today. These colder nights, you get an awful lot more condensation, the damp rises through the air, and that just stops it being uncomfortable in your shelter, and most importantly, increases that internal temperature, which keeps that a little bit more snug while you're waiting for a bite. When it comes to beds, I'll be honest, I always use a benchmark light. For me, I'm nice and mobile for the majority of my fishing, and this just means I save that little bit of weight on the barra. But that said, it is a 3-season system, so in terms of ramping that up to a 5-season, I've got one of the 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗲 heated mattresses, got my little power bank, and I've got a ripstop bed chair cover, so that's going to stop any dew, anything like that, cooling down my sleeping bag. And that heated mattress, I could just increase that internal temperature of the bag, help me get nice and warm and cosy and nod off to sleep. Don't have it on all night, if I'm honest. It's more than warm enough. Once you just get in, half an hour with it on, you're nice toasty warm, and you can sit up, which is probably the most important thing for this time of year. The fish are so much more active in the dark. It really does pay dividends. I'll have the heated mattress on, I'll sit on my bed, I'll be lying on my bed, and I can sit out nice and comfortable, listening for the fish, and they're ultimately going to give away the location. It's going to be more effective, fish where the fish are, and most importantly, be comfortable while I'm doing it. So as I mentioned, the night's rapidly drawing in now. Me and Luke are going to settle down, have a bit of nice food, and hopefully we'll be interrupted in the night or first thing in the morning with a fish. Well, good morning. Quiet night, much different to the night before, but as is the case in autumn a lot of the time, the weather's super changeable at the moment. One evening it might seem all show and no go, following evening you might get some bites, but last night we had real wind yesterday. Last night the wind dropped, the skies cleared, and it really did drop quite cool, and with that the fish really didn't put on much of a show last night. It's not always the case in autumn where they'll throw themselves out left, right and centre, and last night certainly was that. Very quiet, a couple of shows, just on first light though. I did have a bite, not from one of the real big ones of the lake, a nice maybe 𝘃𝗶𝗀𝗲, so we didn't want to bother him too much, so we quickly slipped him back. And I've since put the rods back out, I've redone the rods, and in actual fact I've had a couple of pike now. That's nature of the beast sometimes, particularly when you're using naturals like maggots and casters. It does get them excited, so if you are going to fish with baits like that, it is worth noting that you're going to need the suitable bits and pieces to unhook them, and obviously be nice and confident when you're handling them. So if I'm honest, now the sun's starting to burn through this mist, we've got absolutely zero wind, we've seen zero fish. It's really looking like another bite's going to be a bit of a struggle. So we enjoy the morning, have ourselves a brew, and have a little pack down. So hopefully during the course of the video you've liked what you've seen, you've learnt a few bits, and it'll stand you in good stead for this autumn to catch some more carp.